Ambassador Ron Neumann is the president of the American Academy of Diplomacy. He's had a long and distinguished career in diplomacy in the Middle East and South Asia.
I'm talking to you tonight about one piece of the Middle East, but one that is extremely important, and that is the struggle with violent Islamic radicalism and with the Islamic State. We have now been at war in one fashion or another with this problem for the last 16 years, although in some respects longer. We have active military operations ongoing: Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Somalia. American troops are in all of them. Some of you may have served there, and some of your children or your friends may serve there. This is a really complicated problem, and unfortunately we've been discussing it in very simplistic terms. How many troops do we need? We need a more complicated discussion because the problem is more complicated. I will, like many of my colleagues, I'm not going to give you a solution tonight. Sorry about that. But I hope I will give you a little more way of thinking about the problem. So what I want to do is I want to define the problem that we're dealing with. I want to have you think about some of the parts that are necessary in any policy for it to be a success. And I want to reflect on what means are needed to make that policy work. Talking about the problem of the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, there are variations, and it's a complex issue, but there are certain basics you can get down to. First of all, this is a complex theology that seeks to explain all the ills of society within a single framework. And it has a cure: the rebuilding of the caliphate and the adherence to not just Islamic law, but their view of Islamic law. It has a determination to destroy everything that stands in their path, starting primarily with Muslim states and Muslim populations who have not subscribed to their view, and then secondarily with the West. And this raises the issue that Muslim states and huge parts of the Muslim population are our natural allies in the struggle with the Islamic State. It does not make sense to cast off our allies as part of the struggle. The Islamic State and Al-Qaeda use terrorism and violence as a tactic, but note that terrorism is not the problem, it is the symptom. In other words, it's not the disease, it's the symptom by which you recognize it. But you don't treat any disease, or you hope not to treat a disease, only by treating a symptom. And that is something to which I think we've fallen. And another characteristic of the problem we're dealing with is its ability to find converts and to keep regenerating. So if you look just at these points I've brought out, the nature of its threat, its ability to regenerate, where we find allies, you come to a few, but certain conclusions. One is that we need clear policies. That's not just how many troops do we have to send someplace, it's what are we sending them for? How do you define the policy goal in the service of which you're building a strategy? We haven't been talking about that very much. We go to strategies right away as though we have a goal. Then there are a few key points that need to be part of the policy that we need to define. First, while military force is an absolutely essential part of the policy, it's not the solution by itself because of the ability to regenerate in these movements. So that if you deal only with military force, you don't get to a solution. You just keep mowing the grass, and the grass keeps growing. Second, this is going to be a long-term proposition, no matter how much we might wish that it's not, because we have enemies who are prepared to stay at war for a long time. And they think they're at war with us. I don't know of any war where one side could unilaterally decide it no longer wished to be part of a war. It just doesn't work that way. Third, state stabilization has to be part of the goal, because there has to be something that comes after in order not to keep having the same problem. So how one stabilizes states so that they can control the radicalization that bursts out of them is a key, must be a key part of a policy. And from this comes my fourth point, which is that politics is going to be and must be part of each solution. It cannot be, we can't impose stability on foreign areas and then walk away. We have to build it with foreigners, and that's a big, big process. So this definition of shaping of policy is going to be different for different areas. It's not going to look the same in a Yemen or in a Syria or in Iraq. But because each situation is political, we need to stop this business of having separate political and military strategies. They need to work together. Often the military element is one of the greatest, heaviest tools we have lifting the political solution and making it work. But they need to work together so that as we confront the Islamic State in Iraq, for instance, we know that stabilization is going to be not just capturing Mosul and killing people, although that's going to be part of it, but it's also whether the communities can live together and whether they can work together, whether Mosul can be governed in some way that doesn't just trigger another crisis after the battle. How we hold back or use our military force can put pressure on the political leaders to work together. These are always going to be really hard issues, because if you just help militarily, then you give them a free ride to give way to whatever their hardest political pressures are, which may have nothing to do with stability. If you hold back too much, you may allow the enemy to have battlefield gains. So you need to integrate the two pieces together. And that means that we need to see that force is a part of our political toolkit, but they have to work together. By the way, this discussion of politics means that the currently proposed cuts in the State Department budget are not sound. This is not a security budget. It is a budget that does not understand security. And I'm happy to go into that. In each case, if you're talking about stabilizing states, and this is much too big a job for the United States alone, unquestionably, we need to understand who our allies might be. We need to think about what the interests of the different parties are. That's what diplomats do for a living. We spend a lot of time listening to strange people to find out what it is they want, not to do things their way, but to figure out how you can get them to do things our way, where you have to make compromises, where you might get them to make compromises, how you might get different foreign parties to compromise with each other in order to build a coalition. That was one of the huge successes of the first Bush administration in the first Iraq War, is to figure out what the political issues were that we had to solve in order to bring together this incredible coalition that drove Saddam Hussein out of Iraq. That's part of what diplomats do, and that's why we need to keep them in business. Now, none of this will be easy. None of it will be fast. We are facing enemies that want to destabilize a good part of the world and that want to bring terror here to the homeland. We don't have a choice about continuing to confront this problem. I think we do have a choice about how we think about policy, how we explain it to the American people, and how we build policies that make sense. And I hope that this kind of discussion with you all can be a small piece of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.